Hello everyone, how's it going? Billy Ballgame here, back with another video. On this channel, I'm just a dude who loves baseball and loves to talk about baseball cards. And today's video, I'm going to further my discussion on building a vintage collection on a budget. And today I'm going to focus on pitchers. So here recently, I've had a lot of conversations in my comments on a few of my previous videos about how shockingly, in some cases, cheap vintage pitchers are. And so I've been curious about that myself, and I want to dig a little further into that topic today. So as most of you know, I grew up collecting in the 80s and 90s. And I'm a product of the Beckett magazine era. And it seems like back when I was younger that pitchers were more popular in the hobby. Nolan Ryan was massive when I was growing up. And pretty much all of the sets that came out before Ken Griffey Jr. really got a foothold in the hobby, Nolan Ryan was usually going to be one of, if not the most expensive card in the set, depending on what rookies were also in that set. And Cal Ripken Jr. was also usually pretty expensive. And then as you dig further back into the Beckett in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the pitchers had significant value. And to me, it's insane how little value monetarily and collecting value that the hobby places on pitchers nowadays. So if you look throughout the history, some of the greatest pitchers in the history of baseball, a lot of them don't have value. So what that means for a budget savvy collector is we can pick up some really cool cards of some of the best pitchers in the history of baseball for not a lot of money in a lot of cases. So if you look back, what are the pitchers that you can think of today, in the vintage era that hold a lot of value? And really, there are only a few of them that come to mind for me. So of course, if you go back to the early vintage eras, pre-war and stuff like that, Cy Young has a lot of value. Walter Johnson has a lot of value. Some of his cards, Christy Mathewson has some value. But really, that's all, and I may be missing one or two, but that's really all I can think of in the pre-war vintage era of cards where pitchers have value. And a lot of that is due to the fact of the sets of the cards that they're in and the ages of the cards. So if you compare, some of these pitchers to Ty Cobb and Lou Gehrig and some of the bigger hitters of, the early vintage era, the tobacco era, the post-tobacco pre-war era, like a lot of the pitchers don't have value compared to the stars of those same years. And to me, really, it's really kind of crazy. Like, I understand in the modern era why pitchers don't hold a lot of value. Look at Spencer Strider. Spencer Strider's rookie cards are 2019 or 2020, I believe. Started out as a great pitcher. Every pitcher that's pitching today in baseball is one pitch away from the DL. And really, you could say that about every player in the major leagues that play today. But more and more pitchers get hurt and their careers don't last in a lot of cases. So I understand with modern stuff why pitchers don't hold much value. Dylan Cease is another example. Shane Bieber, Garrett Cole, and he might even be a Hall of Famer. And then you go back a little bit further, guys like Clayton Kershaw, guys like Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander. To me, those guys are no doubt Hall of Famers, and I have a few of their cards pulled, but they still don't have a lot of value. Now, like this is a $90 card, or was a $90 card at one point, in a 9 of Clayton Kershaw. Now, his Topps rookie card is pretty expensive in the 2008 Topps update, but that generation of cards weren't produced on the massive scale that they're being produced today. So I think the fact that those guys are going to be in the Hall of Fame, plus those cards aren't overproduced, kind of help prop up the value of those cards. And here's Max Scherzer. This one's about a $130 card currently. And he's a Hall of Famer, but again, relatively inexpensive for, the player that he is. And then here's Justin Verlander. This is probably in a 9, a $50, $60 card, somewhere around there. So you can get really good pitchers in the modern era, guys like this that are, in my opinion, future Hall of Famers. But then you move back, and again, those are relatively inexpensive. You move back into, kind of the post-junk wax era, and during the junk wax era into the early 80s or into the early 90s and later 80s, guys like Greg Maddux, Pedro Martinez, Randy Johnson, just some of the greatest pitchers in that era, Mike Mussina, that are Hall of Famers. Their cards don't have a lot of value. And a big part of that is the overproduction of the junk wax era, right? But then move further back, and we'll get into the vintage era now, from 80 forward. There are a lot of amazing, some of the best pitchers of all time pitched in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And, I can spend all day rattling off names of amazing pitchers. Nolan Ryan, Tom Seaver, Bert Blyleven, Steve Carlton, who else pitched in the 60s and 70s? Raleigh Fingers, Catfish Hunter, even though he was a reliever. Gaylord Perry, Don Sutton, I may have said him already. Juan Marichal, just a whole lot of Hall of Fame pitchers that pitched in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And other than their rookie cards, in some cases, the rest of their cards throughout their career, depending on what grade you buy them in, if you buy them graded, are amazingly cheap. And today, I wonder why these vintage or even these established Hall of Fame pitchers don't have any value today. It's not that they don't have any value, it's that they are, in my opinion, ridiculously underpriced for the careers that they had in a lot of cases. So my main question today is, why does the hobby dislike pitchers? Why does the hobby hate pitchers? Why does the hobby not seek out the best pitchers in the history of the game? And to me, that's a spot where someone that's collecting on a budget can really start carving out a niche of a really cool collection. And I've got a few of my vintage cards of pitchers pulled out that I'm going to show to you today that are kind of some examples of the types of cards and the types of pitchers that I'm talking about. So I've got some ungraded ones first that I'm going to show. And so this is a card recently that my buddy Adam from Oregon sent me. This is a 71 Topps, Steve Carlton. And I don't know what the value of this card is in a 7 or an 8 graded. But the condition sensitivity of this set would increase the price of a card graded in a 7 or an 8 of Steve Carlton. But this card, I'm guessing, in really nice, clean condition, you can find for, I'm guessing here, 10, 20 bucks in really nice condition. And even his rookie card, I believe in 65, is relatively inexpensive for the career that he had. Depending on what grade you're looking for it in, you can find it in a 5 for under 200 bucks. Steve Carlton, one of the greatest left-handed pitchers of all time, 300 game winner, Hall of Famer. And then you've got Tom Seaver. Now this one is beat up, right? But the Beckett that I have right here has this card listed at 60 bucks. And like, would anybody pay $60 for this card ungraded unless it was just immaculate? Because you can probably buy Tom Seaver cards from the 60s ungraded in really good condition for less than 60 bucks. And so again, other than Tom Seaver's rookie card, which is one of the more expensive rookie cards in the 60s, probably in the top 5 to 8 range, somewhere in that ballpark, Tom Seaver's rookie card is pretty expensive. Other than his rookie card, you can buy Tom Seaver cards graded in mid grades, in collector grades, or, you know, even investor grades, air quotes investor grades, for cheap. And then here's a 76 Jim Palmer. Again, just an amazing pitcher. I think 2-time Cy Young winner. His rookie card is 66 tops, I believe. And I talked about it in previous videos. Just, it's absurd how inexpensive Jim Palmer's rookie card is. And then any card after his rookie card is amazingly affordable. Now, he did not win 300 games for his career. I think he won something like 260 or something like that. But again, there's no doubt that Jim Palmer was one of the best pitchers of his era. And again, he's a Hall of Famer. And then here's a rookie card, Bert Blyleven. Now again, this one is in rough condition. 7s are going to run you probably around $200 or so. But all of the rest of Bert Blyleven's cards are insanely inexpensive. And again, he had one of the best curveballs probably in the history of baseball. I think he won around 280 games or so, and really was just an under the radar pitcher. He pitched for some pretty bad teams throughout his career, but he was always up there at the end of the year as far as, you know, wins, innings pitched, strikeouts, different stuff like that. And he put together a really good, underrated career that flies under the radar, in my opinion. And then here's another Tom Seaver, a 72 tops Tom Seaver. So many of these pitchers, their cards in the 70s are going to be inexpensive. And next I'm going to show some Nolan Ryans. I'll just go ahead and start off with it. This is a 79 tops Nolan Ryan. This card is less than $50 in a 7. If you follow Nolan Ryan's history of cards and his career, and a lot of you are going to know that Nolan Ryan is one of the hardest pitchers through with the most velocity of all time. His rookie card was in 1968, and I believe his last Topps card is in 1996. Nolan Ryan threw over 300 innings, I don't know how many times in his career, had over 300 strikeouts, again, several times in his career. He pitched until he was 46 years old and threw over 100 miles an hour. Some people think that he has thrown the hardest pitch in the history of baseball at 108 miles an hour, I believe. Now, how you clocked pitches back then, it maybe wasn't as accurate, so it took some estimating and different stuff like that. But they believe he's thrown the hardest pitch of all time. He never had an arm injury, throwing as many innings as he did throughout his career, and he's the all-time strikeout leader as a pitcher. He never had an arm injury until he was 46 years old and his UCL in his elbow gave out. And he's one of the greatest pitchers in my opinion. He's he's kind of a tough case because he was dominant. He was one of the most feared pitchers in baseball, but he played on some really bad teams. When he was younger, he was really wild. So he's a polarizing figure in the hobby. But Nolan Ryan's early 70s cards are pretty expensive in high grades, and his rookie card in 68 Topps is an expensive card. It's one of the more expensive rookie cards in the 60s. But Nolan Ryan, what his cards from the mid 70s all the way through the rest of his career, they have some value, but they're not absurdly priced. They're not super expensive unless you're looking for them in super high grades. But you can get, a card like this for under $50. I think his 71 Topps in a 7 is a pretty expensive card. I want to say it's around $300 or $400. But you can buy lower grades in that 71 set of Nolan Ryan for pretty cheap. His 70 Topps is pretty expensive. His 69 Topps is pretty expensive because that's his first solo card, because he was on his rookie card with Jerry Koosman, who was also another good pitcher. And a lot of people don't like his rookie card because he's on it with Jerry Koosman, and a lot of collectors like that 69 Topps card, which is a great card, but that bumps the price up a little bit. But through the mid-70s, through the rest of Nolan Ryan's career, his cards, you can find them for under $100. You can find an 8 in a 79 Topps is probably going to be under $100. So you can find collector grades through the middle 70s to the late 70s that are in collector grade are well under $100. Into the 80s, which we're no longer in the vintage era anymore, but his 8s and 9s, some of his 9s might go above $100, but most of them are going to be under $100. And then once you get to the junk wax era, like you can buy 10s of Nolan Ryan for, under $100. Like his 87 Topps in a 10 is probably a $70 card. So to me, for what Nolan Ryan is in his career, a whole lot of his cards are maybe not underpriced compared to some of the other pitchers, because really, to me, when you look into the traditional vintage era of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, to me, Sandy Koufax, Nolan Ryan, and Bob Gibson are the three pitchers that I would say hold a fair amount of value. But even Sandy Koufax, other than his rookie cards or his rookie card and his early to mid 50s cards, like a lot of those, once you get later into the 50s and then definitely through the 60s, in fives, they're under $100, or they're right there in that $100 ballpark. So even a guy like Sandy Koufax, who again is another very polarizing pitcher within the hobby, like some rank him very high as far as greatest pitchers in the history of baseball, which for about 5 seasons of his career he was. There's no doubt that he was one of the best to ever do it. But some collectors think he didn't really have the longevity to just become one of the greatest of all times, because there are a lot of pitchers, or a lot of players in general, that have a really good peak of 4 or 5 years, but their career is short and you don't really think of them as the greatest ever. I'll give you Eric Davis as an example, or Darryl Strawberry, guys like that were really, really good for a short period of time and then they kind of went away. But Sandy Koufax is known as the left arm of God, and there's no doubt that he's one of the greatest. And once you get again into the early to mid 60s, his cards get pretty inexpensive. And then there are some what I would call oddball cards of these players that are also not expensive. Here's a 64 Topps Giants Bob Gibson that I got as part of the basement collection. And I love these cards. These cards are awesome to me. A lot of people probably don't like them because they're big. And that makes them harder to display. That makes them harder to store. But to me, again, these are super cool cards. And Bob Gibson in a 6, I don't know, $50, $60, somewhere around there. So a pretty inexpensive card. And then I've got one I picked up recently from my buddy Tom, a 63 Bob Gibson. Now this one's a little bit more expensive because I believe it's a high number, and it's still pretty early in his career, and it's a 6. But you could get this in a 5 for, again, under $100. And other than Bob Gibson's rookie card in 1959, the rest of his cards are fairly inexpensive. I think his 62 is a high number, so it's a little bit more expensive. But the vast majority of the Bob Gibson cards, the rest of the way through the 60s and then into the 70s, can be found pretty cheap in, 5s, 6s, and 7s once you get into the 70s. And then I have a lot from the 60 set because that's what the vast majority of my vintage collection is right now because I'm working on that set. But Robin Roberts, if I'm not mistaken, has the most wins of the 60s, I believe, or the 50s. There's a decade in there where he won the most games. I don't remember which one it is, so I apologize. But this in a 7, I got for like 50 or 60 bucks last summer. And again, he didn't win 300 games, but he's in the Hall of Fame. He won like 260 for his career. A really good pitcher, Robin Roberts. Jim Bunning, even his rookie card in 57 Topps is relatively inexpensive. So this as a 60 in a 5 grade is probably, I don't know, a $30, $40 card. But again, Jim Bunning, just a Hall of Fame pitcher, one of the best to ever do it. So in my opinion, for the most part, and some of you may disagree with me, if you're a baseball player and you make it into the Hall of Fame, like in one way or another, you're the best to ever do it at your position. Some may argue about that with Harold Baines and Jack Morris and maybe a couple of the other guys that got in. But generally speaking, if you're a Hall of Famer, like, you're one of the best ever, just by simple percentages of the numbers of players compared to how many people have played Major League Baseball that make the Hall of Fame. And then here's another one, Don Drysdale. Now, Don Drysdale was one of the biggest pitchers the most expensive pitchers in the Beckett's when I was growing up, along with Whitey Ford and Sandy Koufax. Like, these guys were really expensive. But now Whitey Ford, Don Drysdale, like, they're pretty inexpensive. And like I said, Sandy Koufax, a lot of his cards aren't super expensive either. And then you've all heard me talk about Warren Spahn, and I've gotten some people in the comments fired up about Warren Spahn. So Warren Spahn, I never said is better than Sandy Koufax. At his peak, Sandy Koufax was a way better pitcher than Warren Spahn. But when you look at Warren Spahn's longevity, he won 360 games, was just an amazing pitcher for a very long time. Warren Spahn is one of the top 5 left-handed pitchers of all time, in my opinion. And this one, in an SGC 6, is pretty inexpensive. Relatively speaking, Warren Spahn's 48 Bowman, his rookie card, is insanely inexpensive. I think it's 48 Bowman. I think you can find a 4 or a 5 for around $300. So if you're a collector on a $100 a month budget, you could save up 3 months worth of allowance and buy a Warren Spahn rookie card. So don't think that just because it's vintage and they're some of the greatest ever to play the game, that their cards are super expensive, because in a lot of cases, even as I've shown in previous video, their rookie cards aren't even expensive for a lot of these guys. Juan Marichal, guys like that, Don Sutton. So you can get some of the greats. Don't be intimidated by Sandy Koufax cards, because again, you can find Sandy Koufax in the early to mid 60s for relatively cheap, and the same with Bob Gibson, and the same with every one of these pitchers that I'm talking about. Now, I don't know how you get a Cy Young card cheap. I don't know how to do that. If any of you know, let me know, because I need some. I don't know how you get a Walter Johnson card cheap, at least from their playing days. So that's a little bit harder to do. I don't know how you get a Christy Mathewson card cheap from his playing days. Lefty Grove, Dizzy Dean. Like a lot of these guys that are from the 30s and earlier, their cards are going to be expensive unless you buy them in ones or authentics. You may be able to find them ungraded from time to time from the right set for under $100, but that's a little bit harder to do. Sorry, my phone is ringing right now. Hang that up. But another really cool card that I discovered here about a year or so ago is the 1951 Topps Connie Mack's All-Time All-Stars. And this one is Christy Mathewson. And this one's authentic, and it's valued at about $140. Now, when I bought this, I paid $80 for it ungraded. These are a little bit harder to find than a lot of the cards from the 50s and 60s. But if you can find these for relatively inexpensively, like this is not Christy Mathewson's, this isn't a card from his playing days, right? But for me, again, this is a really cool card that you're not going to see out there every day. And if you can pick this up for around $100 or so, like this is a card I would jump on all day. So again, I just wanted to talk about pitchers specifically because I've gotten a lot of comments on some of my previous videos on vintage, on budget collecting, vintage on a budget or whatever. I got a little tongue tied there. And really it is amazing to me and to a lot of people that watch my videos how truly inexpensive vintage pitchers can be. And if you just don't like pitchers, then don't buy pitchers, right? Collect what you like, add the cards to your collection that you want to own and that you're proud to have. But if you want to get into vintage, and you think Bob Gibson, Nolan Ryan, Sandy Koufax, you think all those guys are too expensive, please do some digging. Do some research, because I really do think that you'll be surprised how cheap some of these guys can be had for. And so I just wanted to share my thoughts with everyone on that. And once again, if you're still with me, I appreciate it. And I apologize how irregular my videos have been coming out, but we've been so busy with baseball. So I got home from practice Friday and was just wiped out. And then I coached, this is Sunday as I'm filming this video. And then yesterday I coached a doubleheader and left at, I think it was 9:30 in the morning to catch the bus. And then we got home after 6 last night. So it was just a long day. So again, I apologize for that. But I try to, again, if I don't get one out Monday, I try to get it out Saturday. If I don't get it out Saturday, I try to get it out Sunday. So I try to get them out I try to be as steady with my videos as I can. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video. No research, no notes. This is just me flying, off the cuff, showing you some cards that I think are really cool, that are inexpensive. Like this Christy Mathewson is the most expensive card, I believe, maybe the 63 Bob Gibson that I pulled out, right? And both of these are probably less than $150 or so at the most. So all of these cards that I showed today, even if you have a, sorry, I bumped my camera putting Christy back. If you collect on a $50 a month budget, every single one of these cards that I showed you today are cards that you could add to your collection if you so choose. The Christy Mathewson, 2 or 3 months worth of allowance, if you can find one, like that's a card you could add to your collection. You can find them on eBay. But if you're a guy that's going to go to shows and hunt for them, they're not going to be at every show. Sammy Thunder recently picked one up that he found at a show, but I've gone and I haven't been going to as many shows here in the last couple years, and I need to change that. But this one, the one that I own, is the only one that I have seen in person. I've never seen one at a Columbia show. I've never seen one at a Jeff City show. I've never seen one in a St. Louis show. I've only gone to a few, and I haven't gone to a bigger Kansas City show yet. So if you want to add some of those Connie Mack's all-time All-Stars to your collection, like, to me, these are amazing. And if you can find them not ripped out of the perforation, they're worth more because then they can grade as a number instead of authentic. But again, to me, these are just some of the coolest cards of all time, and I love them. So a great card that you can add relatively inexpensively to your collection. So I think I'll wrap it up with that. So again, I appreciate everybody's support. If you're still with me, I appreciate it. Please give this video a thumbs up. Throw a comment down what you think about collecting pictures from the vintage era on a budget. And I guess I'll wrap it up at that. So until the next one, everybody have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.